Your Zoom recording. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Twanna Hodge. I am a third-year PhD student at the University of Maryland, College Park, College of Information. We just switched from College of Information 30 to College of Information, so it's always new to remember to say that. And I am really excited for all of those who joined us here live, and for those who will be watching this recording. Welcome to the last panel of the INFOcon 2004, the featured information science. I would say I am going to let the panelists introduce themselves. They're going to have about 5 minutes to talk about who they are, who's their advisor, one research project, and then I will get into questions, prepared questions, and then questions to the audience. For those who have joined us, feel free to add questions to the chat box and also to introduce yourself as well. Currently, we're still waiting on 2 more people to hopefully join us whenever they can, and so they will chime in. But we're going to go ahead and get started just because of time is limited. So I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Twanna Hodge. I am a third-year PhD student. I am currently in the phase of working on my integrated paper, which is comparable to comprehensive exams or qualifying exams right now. My advisor is the illustrious Dr. Amelia Gibson, and she is head of the study lab, and I will also drop links to that lab. And one of my current research project with my integrated paper is focusing on, it's a phenomenology study. I always have to sound that out, that looking at how licensed mental health professionals provide mental health care to English-speaking Black Caribbean communities. And so for me, a lot of my research is around mental health literacy, mental health information behavior, particularly focusing on English-speaking Black Caribbean communities. And so I also realize I'm speaking very quickly, so I'm going to slow down because I'm really nervous and excited to do this. I always love sharing information with others. That's why I used to be an academic librarian for 7 years before I decided to pivot and become a doctoral student. I got my bachelor's degree from the University of the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas campus. Born and raised on the island of St. Thomas, which is a part of the United States Virgin Islands. Geographically, very close to Puerto Rico. That's why you hear my accent. And I got my master's in library and information science from the University of Washington in Seattle. Go Huskies, purple and gold. And then I worked for 7 years as an academic librarian for different institutions from Utah, SUNY Upstate, Virgin Islands, Florida, before I decided to pursue my PhD. So I will let Allison go ahead and introduce herself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Allison Jennings-Roche. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Maryland with Twanna. I am in my 4th year, hopefully final year, we'll see. Trying to get it together. I have deadlines for the rest of my project. I am advised by Dr. Paul Yeager, who's a distinguished scholar teacher at the University of Maryland, overall wonderful advisor. I also work full-time at the University of Baltimore, where I am the Associate Director of Digital Initiatives and Collections, and was a 2024 Library Journal mover and shaker. I think I'll keep saying that just to the end of this year. I research rhetoric, ethics, and advocacy for libraries, particularly as it relates to censorship and anti-democratic movements. I've currently working on a couple of kind of overlapping pieces. I did one on the rhetoric of the right-wing movements and how they're attempting to normalize the idea of censorship in, the public's mind. I have a piece that I'm currently analyzing some secondary data sets that were given to me by different organizations, where I'm tracing the rise of, right-wing populism, education polarization, general polarization, and how that has managed to kind of dramatically shift American public opinions on libraries, public librarians, right? We've seen in 3 years, the perception of librarians has gone from perhaps the most trusted institution in American life to 42% of Republicans are comfortable putting librarians in jail in just 3 years. So it's kind of a wild time to be writing about these things. And in that, I'm also kind of developing an ethical framework for political engagement for librarians and library advocates, because we are not super engaged in the political sphere and are kind of uncomfortable with it, right? It's not something that we have well-established frameworks to do. So I'm kind of doing a lot of that. I also teach one class at the University of Maryland on top of working, and I live in Baltimore with my husband. I have 4 children, ages 12, 10, 8, and 6, and previously have degrees in MLIS with diversity inclusion, a master's in legal and ethical studies, an undergrad degree in poli-sci and English lit, which is kind of where I think I've gotten in this like rhetoric plus politics. It's all kind of comes together. I was a first gen student and even a McNair scholar in undergrad at UMBC, and was really just kind of passionate about, how to use all of my various interests to kind of help people and save the world. And I guess right now that is libraries. So I'm doing what I can, where I can. Thanks.
Thank you, Allison. Jay, you can introduce yourself.
I'm Jay. I'm a PhD student in my third year in the HCIL. Work with Dr. Joel Chan on conceptualizing and reconceptualizing the different tools that scholars have to make sense of research. So right now I'm working on a project that's looking at how scholars and lay people discuss uh, different sorts of research on social media sites, wikis, personal websites, special research collaboration platforms, and try to critique that research, try to make sense of it a little bit more skeptically. I'm also interested in things like evidence synthesis, making sure that we can find out what are the reliable claims across different applied branches of psychology, medicine, biology, and try to summarize them, visualize them in a dashboard, communicate them to key decision makers so that they can use the knowledge that we're very sure of. A lot of this is grounded in, my background, which is very scientific, neuroscience, psychology, working cognitive science. I've been in academia for the past decade or so in some fashion. Before grad school, I was briefly a UX researcher, instructional designer, lab manager as well. But after graduation, I think I'll try to shift a little bit more into things like data science, program evaluation, public policy as well. I'm really interested in ways that we can provide politicians and bureaucrats with different information resources and ways of thinking that would help them make really informed judgments about, urban design or education or health and well-being, things like that. I could go into that a lot more, but that's kind of like the meat and potatoes of who I am. And yes, I'm also working on my integrated paper, which is due in a couple of days, just like Twanna and very many other students who are in their third year stressing out over this very important milestone.
Thank you, Jay and Allison, for introducing yourselves. And so I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I'm going to pin us so that you're able to easily see us. So that means you get to see all of our wonderful reaction. And so the first question that I will go ahead and ask is, what led you to pursue a PhD in information studies, and why did you choose UMD College Park, College of Information, to pursue your PhD? And so I'm going to toss that to Allison first, Jay, and then I will go last.
Yeah, so I have a kind of non-traditional path to PhD work, as I think a lot of people in info studies do, right? I was in a program that really prepared first generation and low income scholars to go on to doctoral work, even in undergrad. From there, I graduated in 2008 into a recession and very much was overwhelmed with the idea of, all of the things that had to do with a lack of steady income and all of those things that I knew would come along with graduate school. So I quickly got a full-time job and a master's in legal and ethical studies, had a bunch of kids, and was like, okay, well, when I'm done having kids, I'm going to go back to school to get my library degree and then figure it out from there. I think I still want to get the doctorate, but who knows? So I started library school 2 weeks after my fourth kid was born. and very quickly realized I loved the field. I've been working in the field since before that child was even born, but I realized that I wanted to go deeper and I really wanted to kind of make a difference on the idea of libraries and librarianship kind of in American society. From there, I was actually constrained by location, right? I live in Baltimore. Again, I have 4 kids. I have a full-time job. We weren't moving for grad school for me, so it was kind of UMD or bust. I was thrilled to work with my advisor. I luckily was put in contact with him before I started the program, and it has continued to be a fabulous relationship in terms of just working together, but also in terms of support of my research aims. But there weren't many options for me legitimately. I just couldn't pick different programs. I was looking at adjacent type programs, not necessarily info, a couple of others in the state of Maryland. But the information studies was my top choice. And I applied in 2020 during the pandemic when the other 2 programs I was looking at weren't accepting applicants, actually, because they shut down applications because of the pandemic. So it was legitimately the iSchool or bust. But I got in, it's been wonderful, and I'm really, really grateful to be here. But I don't know how useful it is to everyone else that I'm just like, well, it was this or nothing at that point, right? I would have gone somewhere else. So really happy to be here, though.
Jay?
I guess there's a little bit of overlap between our stories. Well, for the first part, I think I'm a little bit different. I do have a background in academic research right from the end of my undergrad because I'd loved the research experiences in my undergrad. And frankly, I didn't want to work right after it. So I went ahead and got my master's in educational psychology and technology. I was at the University of Minnesota. I spent a lot of time in the Midwest, so the University of Wisconsin as well as a research assistant. Um, and I kind of felt like I was a little bit jaded, having experienced some things in a particular lab, which will be nameless, and working with someone who will remain nameless. So after that, I began to work in UX research, instructional design for many years, knowing that I kind of had my identity built around doing academic research, but I couldn't find the motivation to do something specific and feel as though I had an equal voice. So sometime around the pandemic, having been employed as a research lab manager, I decided to look at grad school again. And my mentor at the time at the University of Pittsburgh, so that I should choose my PhD program based just on the fit with my respective advisor. So I didn't look at, elite status or anything like that. I didn't really try to use simple heuristics. I really just ended up researching a number of different folks who were interested in the sorts of things that I was interested in. And looked at, all the different HCI programs, looked at all the faculty profiles, contacted a few, even spent one summer visiting some faculty around the country because I had time to do so. And I visited Joel, my current advisor, the summer before I applied. So I had a good time, and he was very generous with his time. He told me exactly what I needed to do to kind of think very deeply about my interests and a particular path that I had to write in my personal statement. So I spent a couple months reflecting on what specifically I wanted to do because my interests were very general at the time. So I had to synthesize, prior personal experiences, research, abilities, work. And magically, I was able to do that. Ended up applying to work with him and him only. That was my one shot into a PhD program because no one else was doing exactly the type of thing that he happens to be doing now. He is very great in that he combines psychology and HCI and AI and science and tech studies in a very unique way. And I kind of saw myself in him. Hopefully, he saw himself in me. So it turned out to work quite beautifully. In fact, I'm not very sure I could even do any kind of PhD program right now if it wasn't for this department. this lab. Well, I'm very, very dependent on everything going okay here. But yeah, if you can find that one right person, then you're gonna have a very good PhD experience, because I've had okay experiences elsewhere and one very bad one, which turned me off of academia. So if you can't find the right fit, both intellectually and personally, someone with a supportive personality who can help you out while also being, you know, demanding so you complete your work, that balance I think is very important. Yeah, I guess we're zooming into panel question 2 here, but who is your advisor? I think is an important part of our response to question 1. Why are you pursuing the PhD? I'll turn it over to Twanna now.
All
I see a
right,
look on her face. I don't know what's going on.
No,
She's
no.
digesting. Okay.
So as I was listening to your stories, I was like, mine is kind of different. So unlike Allison, like kudos to her for like doing all of that at a PhD program. I am single. I don't have any children. I don't have a partner. I can move and I have some flexibility. And so in 2021 is when I decided to pursue a PhD. I'd always been kind of interested in a PhD program. Like when I was in my master's program, I spoke to several PhD students to ask about like their experiences and like things of that nature. But the thing is that I didn't have was like a burning question, like something that I was willing to spend years, kind of researching, fine-tuning, doing research on. And I'd always wanted to become a librarian. So like I was excited to practice and et cetera. And so after navigating academic librarianship, the ups and downs of it. When I was at the University of Florida, I was a diversity, equity, and inclusion librarian there. And so I was in that position for about 2.5 years. And I quickly realized I needed an exit strategy because I saw the writing on the wall and what was happening with the anti-DEI, anti-war campaigns that started to occur more in 2021 and 2022. And so I decided that I wanted to pursue my PhD. I'd applied to 3 institutions, and it was Syracuse University, University of South Carolina, and UMD. And the reason why is because at that time, these 3 institutions, along with 2 others, along with ALA, American Library Association, end up receiving an IMLS grant for the Spectrum Doctorals Fellowship Program. And so I'm a 2022 Spectrum Doctoral Fellow. And so what that means is that for 3 years, I have support, external fellowship support, which has been instrumental. There's 7 of us across the country, fellows, and there's 2 at UMD. So for me, funding was a huge plus for me because I hadn't quite saved up. So finding a program that was fully funded was very important to me, as well as finding a place where I already had community was also very important to me because I didn't want to have to like keep reestablishing community. And so I was fortunate enough I had close friends that lived in Maryland. And I also applied here and said yes because they have a Latin American Caribbean Studies graduate certificate program. None of the other institutions had them. And also Dr. Paul Yeager was my provisional advisor. And we'll talk a little bit about like, advisors and like you can switch. It might be different depending on the institution that you're at, but and then, because at that time, Dr. Amelia Gibson had arrived the same time as me, but was just settling in. And so it's been an interesting journey. It's been an interesting journey. And we'll dig into that a lot during this panel. I say interesting because there's some things that you anticipate and there's some things that you don't quite anticipate that that kind of occurs. And so I'll dive into question number 2 and then pass it to Jay and then pass it to Allison. And so, as I mentioned before, Dr. Paul Yeager, who is Allison's advisor, he was my provisional advisor. And so for UMD, one of the requirements is that you meet with someone like 2 or 3 faculty members because because it's important that you find someone who aligns with the research that you're doing. So similar to what Jay said. And so what happens is that in your first year, you have a provisional advisor. That could be your advisor throughout your whole time in your PhD program, or you can switch advisors. And so the reason I ended up switching was because my research interest drastically changed. So what I wrote about to get into my program, not what the kind of research I'm doing now. So for me, I was fortunate enough that at that time I was kind of like being mentored by, Amelia in that case. And so when it came time for our first year review, so that is what we have here, it made sense based on my new research topic for Dr. Gibson to become my advisor. And so that's kind of what happened. But I had a great, advisory relationship with Paul. One of the things he would tell me is that I'm doing too much, and I listened. And so I kind of cut down on a lot of things that I was doing that was kind of distracting me from focusing on my PhD. And the relationship that I have with Dr. Gibson, now I tell people like, she is one of the reasons why I am still in this program. Not that there's other things, but well, there are. But because that she's very supportive, knowledgeable within my research areas, and is able to guide me in the ways. And she's like, there are things that Dr. Hodge can do, and there's things that Twanna can do. And the goal is to get me through the program, which is necessary because sometimes I get too excited about too many things. I want to do all the things because there's plenty of opportunities. And so with that, I will also say that it is also important. We have a statement of mutual expectations that you usually do when you are working. And sometimes you work with your supervisor, sometimes you work with other people because how you're funded is like either through a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship. And so that is something that we do in the beginning. But I believe that having a strong, respectful, mutually beneficial relationship with your advisor is necessary to be successful in your grad program. All right, Jay, how about you?
Yeah, well, given that we've already kind of gone over the advisor information, I kind of move on to the second question. How do you maintain a respectful and mutually beneficial partnership? I guess kind of get the luck of the draw there in terms of personalities commingling. Yeah, thankfully I haven't had any super important problems that I can kind of conjure up from memory over the past 2 years. But yeah, you'll eventually have some kind of disagreements about research or timing and things like that. So I don't know, I guess try to meet people halfway and try to compromise, tell them your perspective. I do have like one project that I want to work on more than the current project, although I think the current project is very interesting and very relevant to my research identity. Starting next year, I think I want to focus more on the evidence synthesis part of my research portfolio. But I sense that there is some kind of difficulty in convincing my advisor of that. I guess we've kind of been ignoring that potential for disagreement up to now. So there is some possibility that, we could disagree in a very strong way later on. But I'm treating it just like a problem in your research, right? So maybe there's a way to kind of synthesize two team members' interests. You can find some kind of middle ground. Maybe you can find a project to work on for your milestones and then a separate project that you work on here and there ad hoc. There's always some kind of compromise that you can reach. And everyone else, like basically everyone else I've worked with at different universities, we can get along quite well if you just are a decent, respectful person. If you tend to have very significant disagreements about how things are going, then it's better to kind of surface those early on and say, well, I've kind of slid into this kind of phase where I'm not as interested in these sorts of things, and I don't agree with this sort of timeline. This doesn't align with my career goals. It's better to say that from the get-go. Because the pace of research can be so quick that sometimes you're just focusing on the kind of minute things that go on day to day and month to month, but you may not be talking about the overall life goals or what your goal for the PhD is. Thankfully, I think there are some requirements that at the beginning of a semester you discuss with your advisor or semesterly plans, and you submit this kind of plan for graduate study, something like that. So my advisor does this very regularly with me, and that seems to be going well. You may also want to kind of think about how well can your advisor prepare you for your postgraduate career. They may not know everything about it, right? Depending on the sort of thing that you want to do, they may know a little bit or basically nothing. I wouldn't expect that you should go to them for career advice as much. Maybe go to other PhD students, network more broadly. But yeah, even then I've kind of gotten lucky there because more than other mentors, my current advisor actually sends me ideas for jobs, internships, things like that. And so that's something I can talk to him about. I think I've said all that I could possibly say for this one. Be kind, you will receive kindness right back.
Is it on me to jump in here, Twanna?
Right ahead, Allison. It's
Go
all
for it.
you.
Yeah, so I think for me, this will kind of like, mine's feeding into the third question, I guess. But for me, largely, the most important thing for me is having an advisor who understands how to work with part-time students, right? And I say that with like little quote hands because I'm not going to graduate at a part-time pace, but I am not funded by the University of Maryland. I work full-time outside of the iSchool, right? Like I'm self-funded. Technically, my university pays for my tuition dollars. So for me, that has been really important knowing that I have an advisor that understands how to work with part-time students. And I would highly recommend, even if you think like, oh, I'm going to really hustle and go at a full-time pace, work with someone who doesn't necessarily expect that you're like going to be in their lab or like, I will email at 2 a.m. and on weekends and it's fine, right? There's a lot of that kind of understanding that I am trying to do this research and do these things kind of outside a bunch of other responsibilities. I will say that there has been a lot of opportunity for kind of creativity and collaboration, kind of pushing the boundaries of what we think frameworks and methodologies can be, and like that relationship's really beneficial. I think I've been really blessed with having an advisor, Dr. Paul Yeager, who treats me very much like a colleague at this stage of the process, and therefore my input's taken. And at a certain point, if I want to do things that don't 100% make sense, or I get distracted doing too many things because Paul's great at telling me I'm doing too many things, there is a level of like, all right, well, talk to me in a couple weeks when you can come back up for air and focus on writing again, right? Like, and that's for me being really clear and open about where I'm at, where my head is at. And, I tend to work in kind of fits and starts. That works out well. And I'm really lucky to be able to be clear and open in that way. And I do admit, despite having probably the best advisor on the face of the planet, I say no bias whatsoever, that there's a lot of freedom in being self-funded too, though, because there is less stress for me in knowing like if I have a disagreement, my employment's not through the university, like that does give a decent amount of freedom. I wouldn't recommend it. You might lose your mind, but I have a little bit less stress in knowing that my employment or my income is coming from the school, like the college that I'm doing my research with. Which I almost think frees me up to be a little bit more creative and boundary pushing and kind of do my own thing in terms of my research. So many minuses, but a few pluses to working full time while doing it.
Thank you, Allison. And it's also a good thing to know like how much you can take on, kind of what is your capacity, whether you're looking for a program that is hybrid, fully online or in person. I know for me, it had to be in person because I probably would not have made it to this point if it was fully online, honestly speaking. And so, really thinking about that is also important, and getting to know people, because like some of my committee members, for one of them, like I knew them through library association work before I became a student at UMD. And so, going into number 3, thinking about like working part-time, full-time, if you have a small business, if you're an entrepreneur, the hustle and grind in the PhD program is no joke. And it's something where for me, going from having a full-time salary to like now having half of that salary was a very huge adjustment for me, even though for the UMD program, you get guaranteed funding, which could be through a teaching assistantship or research assistantship for 9.5 months, and maybe for 12 months. However, that still means that for us, it's 20 hours a week. And that is capped for international students. For domestic students, etc., we can work up to 30 hours, and there's a cap on that. And so there is, if you're going to work through UMD, there's a cap on that. And so for me, that was a major struggle in the first 2 years. Because for me, I ended up having my fellowship, which had like paid me a stipend for 20 hours a week. But then I took on a greater position, because living in the DMV era is not cheap either. And also I was doing other things, like being an instructor for Library Juice Academy, a co-instructor, and like doing consulting, etc. And I had to like severely cut back on that, getting to my integrated paper point. But it was definitely a struggle at different points in time, especially when there was a lot of deadlines coming up. And I was that overachiever, kind of taking 4 courses a semester, because I was also doing the certificate. And then also working, doing all that other stuff. I definitely experienced burnout once or twice. So that is me. So I don't recommend that, because burnout doesn't look good on anybody, despite what America says. So Allison, and then Jay, how do you manage that? Because you've talked about, Dr. Yeager being really good and supportive about like being able to say like, okay, I'll check in a few weeks when you're able to focus on XYZ. But is there anything else you would like to add?
Ooh, I don't know if I have good advice for anyone, right? Like the burnout cycles that I've been through over the past, 3.5 years, I'm in my 4th year, are pretty intense, right? Like, and I've had to definitely not show up, right, for like my kids or my family in the way I wish I want to. I still think it's good enough, right? Like I think a lot of those voices in my head are very gendered in terms of like the level of showing up that I feel like I should be doing. I will say, and I'll put this out there particularly for the women, right? Like make sure you have an actually supportive partner, not somebody who's theoretically supportive. And there's been many battles where I'm like, yes, you say you support me in theory, but I need you to just make dinner without me asking, right? Like, and those constant negotiations, if you happen to be, a woman or non-binary person partnered particularly with a cis man, like those things are real and can create just as much stress in your program as the actual program or the job or those kinds of things. I've been, I've had struggles, right? Like I was at a previous job that was not a healthy environment for me and I needed to leave. So I took I've changed jobs a couple of times. I'm very happy in this current one in that I'm salary, I am library faculty, right? Like I'm technically tenure track. My research supports my job, right? Like I'm supposed to be going up for tenure soon. But I'm still probably working 70 plus hours a week if we're adding up the day job plus the PhD work plus everything else. So it's really about just kind of finding those times for breaks And I think there was like some not great self-help book I read years ago, right? That was, what was it? Like however many hours you have in a week, think about it that way. Like not every day are you going to be able to like work out and work and do your PhD work and eat healthy, et cetera, et cetera. So like try to think about your time in terms of weeks or weeks on end. And those kinds of things is like a way that's been healthy for me, and understand that there's seasons for sure. And like coursework is harder in the sense that you have a lot more demands, like a lot of micro deadlines, right? That stage of the program. But the research stage, which I've been in for a while now, is also intense because it's very self-directed. And if you have other demands on your life, like I have small children, I have a job, all of those things, that it's easy to let those pieces of my life eat away at my research and writing time because I don't have these like micro deadlines. So that has been something that I've had to work towards in terms of keeping myself on track in terms of writing. Currently, with the current political environment, there's a bit of a fire under my proverbial, you know what, because I'm writing about the things that are falling apart right now, right? So that for better or for worse, I'm like, oh, I really got to get these pieces out that have been percolating for a long time. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but it's certainly adding to like kind of that burnout, the reset cycle, but being really clear with my partner, with my kids, right? With my advisor, obviously, and then even my, at work, having a reasonably supportive work environment makes a difference. But it's never pretty. It's always a mess. My house is a mess. I don't eat well. I've gained 20 pounds. Like, let's be real. Like, this is not exactly an easy endeavor while balancing all the things.
All right, so start myself. Thank you. So it was good to hear about other students who I may be seeing a little bit or not at all, and kind of get their perspectives, because sometimes I can connect to some of the things, and the other things I feel very out of my depth with. Like I don't have 4 kids, a husband, and all of this full-time job stuff. But when I entered the program, I tried to approach it as I'd done previously with other graduate programs. So I knew I'd be full-time student, but at the time that I was applying, um, yeah, I kind of gotten used to a certain kind of lifestyle with a full-time job and the money. So that was very good. So I wanted to keep that up. I did have a contract that was full-time during a very good chunk of my first half of my degree, along with some other consultations and freelance work. I didn't work full-time the whole part of my first 2 years, but for most of it. And yeah, I did feel like I was overwhelmed. There was quite a lot to do, constantly behind, constantly kind of apologizing for being behind. If you prioritize your, coursework and your job, then you're set. But if you're doing some kind of research project that may or may not be funded, then you won't make as much progress on it as perhaps you would like. And I wasn't on a graduate research assistantship or doing some kind of well-defined program. I was working based on my interests and what my advisor was interested in within that set of options that I provided him. The good news was that once all of this ended and the summer came, I was able to focus on my research a lot more. So I really love the summer. I really love, winter break. I really love all of that. Weekends in particular are really great for doing very deep, focused reading. For the kind of health and well-being side of things, I try to get 7, 8 hours of sleep most nights, although that's not always possible. But I think if you prioritize sleep, then you kind of be in a good mood and be creative and be productive. You may not have time to exercise and eat perfectly well as you might have in the past, but I think it is still possible to do a little bit, assuming you don't have kids and a husband and all of that. You just sort of have to do it very quickly and multitask. So I kind of make my phone calls as I'm on the treadmill and read as I'm on the treadmill as well. So you have to find your own way of doing things. I was just eating lunch at 5 p.m. right before this because of my integrated paper. So this is a particularly busy time for me. Typically, I'll be on a much more relaxed schedule. So as long as I'm not working and as long as there's a major paper due in 6 days, it is actually very nice. It's just that I've put myself into a little bit of bind where I procrastinated on writing, and now I have to kind of like push through weekends and things like that. So you'll go through highs and lows if you are this single person living alone. But you'll, I think, handle it just fine. I know that there are many other students at different age brackets who I've talked to who have a full-time job in a big tech company or governmental organization that's very serious. Those are kind of my heroes because they make me look bad. They make me look like a slacker. So you can kind of go talk to those individuals. Allison, you can go talk to Allison if you happen to be the sort of person who's already married and have kids and all that fun stuff. But to tell you the truth, I never told my advisor about my work very deeply, just kind of loosely saying this is available. This is something I might be doing during the winter near the end here in the summer, because they may not care about such things. So be upfront if it helps or not. I don't know how to know this. It really just depends on what those expectations are on a weekly basis. Yeah. And this is very different from other programs. Other programs that I've been a part of fund everyone basically all the time, right? So you don't have to work. But yeah, info brings in people who've already done things, already had graduate experiences, employment, this whole life arc. And then you find info. It's relatively uncommon to find people who just come out of undergrad into an info studies program. That's one major difference to consider. That's it from me.
Thank you, Jay and Allison. And so we have one more question that I am going to toss to the panelists. And then we're going to open it up to audience Q&A because I want to make sure you all have have some time to ask your questions and for us to answer them. And so the last question is, what were some learning curves or realities that set in once you were in a program? What lessons learned can you share? And I will toss it to Allison and then Jay, and then I will go last.
So that's a funny one, right? Like I feel like there's a new lesson every day. I think this is being recorded. I'll just say it. Coursework is not that hard. Research is fine. Everybody's just like fumbling their way through it. Like what you have to add is worth sharing, right? Like the imposter syndrome is not necessarily real. And like getting through the PhD program is much more about your ability to navigate procedures and processes and understand like the handbook and check the boxes than it is being like the most singularly brilliant person that ever existed or having the best possible research topic. Like you can, right? Like I'm super jazzed about my research. But like and I don't think I'm singularly brilliant. I just am excited to do it. But at the same time, like I think getting through is really just being able to slog and check the boxes and know what you got to do next. And I think that that's not talked about enough when people are kind of getting into it. It's not horrible, but it is just another set of hoops you have to jump through.
Anything to add, Jay, about any learning curves or things that set in once you're in programs or any lessons learned to share?
Yeah, I think I echo Allison saying that if you actually do your readings and go to your lectures and work through your assignments, people recruited you because you're capable of doing that. That's kind of the bare minimum. You're able to do this, just kind of power through your papers and things. For me, I think the learning curve was kind of knowing my limits and the number of things I could handle at any one time. So just trying to make sure that if you're the type of person who has whole life outside of your PhD program, that you find a way to set your workload at a manageable level before you enter the semester and find these ways to create micro deadlines, as she said. For me, it's finding a quiet place to work. And, you know, I didn't receive, I think, the resources I needed here. So I requested a small office from which I could work, and that's really increased my productivity. Just finding the kind of environment in which you can get the work done away from home, away from some of those cubicle areas. There are other little things like, you know, I'm learning a new method right now, which is more qualitative, and I kind of underestimated how long the project would take and how much I'd have to think about synthesizing the data into themes. It's not rocket science, but you kind of can sometimes fall into the habit of underestimating how long things will take and the distractions that will crop up. You gotta, I guess, double the amount of time that you are gonna allocate to some very big task like a research project, which is projects always have like twists and turns that you might not expect. So, yeah, allocate more time, try to seek help. You know, you may end up taking courses that might be considered difficult, but they tend to be in other departments. Like whenever I've taken CS courses, they can be quite a lot to deal with. But you just kind of deal with the difficulty of whatever it is that you're doing. The good news is you can kind of go off to specific people and find help. Like, and just informally, I've advised, can't name names, but different students at different stages of the program on research methods and the hidden curriculum of doing a graduate degree, how hard it is to do research, how common it is to fail at something, how important it is to iterate. So, you know, many people may not have had that kind of experience, so I can provide that background knowledge, that kind of assurance to them. In turn, I might ask someone else for help with more technical matters. So, yeah, my basic advice is to allocate more time and seek help early on. Yeah, I think we can be doing a better job as a PhD program, making sure that we can share our wisdom more effectively, because you know, sometimes I go into a symposium and find that someone's worked on this complicated research project and it could have really benefited from the insights of, you know, that faculty member or that student, but they don't talk to one another. So before you start something, of course, research project, some kind of initiative, just kind of make sure that you post a message and get some kind of input from someone else, right? I think, yeah, I think even I could be doing that. I'm talking about this problem, and certainly I could be doing this better myself. But there are definitely Slack groups and things where you can post your ideas and projects and just say, hey, I'm curious about this. Yeah, typically you tend to talk with the people in your research team or lab much more. And when people join, you find that that collaboration increases, which is wonderful. Yeah, I think I'll kind of leave it at that because I don't want to ramble.
Thank you to Allison and Jay. So I think there is very many lessons that I have learned in this program. And I think for me, the biggest thing is being able to have community. So community, building community, maintaining community, feeling connected. I truly believe that it is important to have connections within your program, but also outside of it, in your institution and in the community. Because pursuing a master's degree, PhD can be very isolating sometimes, especially if you don't have someone in your personal life or network who has done that, you know, has gone through a PhD program. I've been fortunate enough that I have mentors who in the field who are LAS faculty who I can go to for a number of different things. And so also thinking about, you know, developing, if you don't already have that community, developing that community even before you start, so you have a firm foundation with people, because it will get really hard, really dark, very challenging very quickly sometimes. And being able to have somebody who knows what you're going through is also important, but also to have somebody else who's like, this is more important. Life doesn't stop because you started a PhD program. For me, I believe in being a human being first. I'm everything else second. And so as somebody who's neurospicy, who have like chronic conditions, et cetera, like for me, it is acknowledging and understanding that my capacity and ability to do things is going to change, semester by semester. And so like this semester is particularly challenging because, as Ajay and Allison mentioned, because of like that unstructured time. And so, you're having to it's very self-directed. Like I think about the PhD being like the most like the biggest project management thing of your life for like 4 to 5 years, because it's the minutia, it's the things of like, you have to fill out your candidacy form once you make candidacy. Sometimes you have to remind your advisor to be like, hey, I did my first year review. Did you send the thing to the doctoral committee? And so you have to be your biggest like advocate. And also don't be your biggest bully or critic. There's enough people out there who's willing to do that. But also finding the help that you need. I had somebody who was like, get a therapist. And I was like, you know what? As a mental health researcher and advocate, that is one of the key things. Like whatever you need for you to be successful, find it and get that support because it's going to look different for everyone. And so with that, are there any questions? And since we started a little bit late, if Allison, Jay, are you okay with staying maybe a few minutes after? Okay. All right. So that is it for scripted questions. Any questions from the audience? You can either put it in the chat box, you can send it to me individually, you can unmute. Hopefully you have the ability to unmute to ask your question aloud. But we are here to answer any burning questions. We can access all the hard questions. I can stare deeply into everyone's eyes. I'm sorry. I love teaching, and so always there's a question. I appreciate the presentation. Great advice. Insight, any advice, best practices for when your work is interdisciplinary? Ooh, it reminds me of the conversation we had in one of the 800 class about what interdisciplinary is. But I see Allison has muted. Go ahead, Allison.
No, I just was gonna say like that you explain why that is useful to your advisor as best to your ability and assemble a good committee, right? Like I think that can be one of the biggest challenges when you're interdisciplinary. My work is very much so, and kind of assembling my team has been a bit of a challenge and something that I've really had to strive for because I don't want to have to operate defensively, like, oh, I'm pulling this from here, I'm pulling this from there. This makes sense, I swear, has been a struggle, but also an opportunity to kind of like find my people. And I will say my advisor has been absolutely essential in that. But I do know of others in the program who have struggled when they've kind of been approaching it from a more narrow framework or like within a specific lab or something along those lines, where it can be harder, right? And recognizing that, and not everything needs to be everything, right? Like maybe not everything needs to be in the dissertation. Sometimes you can put something in the dissertation and something over here, put a pin in it. Like sometimes that's just kind of the nature of the work.
And I will add, my topic is very interdisciplinary, spanning from like Caribbean studies, Black studies, information behavior to immigration studies and disability studies and all these things. And so like it can be challenging in that sense when you have to pull from so many disciplines and make it make sense to someone else. That's not you. Because like you understand the connection. You're the one that has like spent time coming up with the research question, diving into the literature, all of these things. And so it's like being able to find people who might have like expertise in each of the disciplinary areas so that be able to help you, but understanding that like your research have value, and it's important, especially, nowadays to have work that is very interdisciplinary. And the thing is that like, if you realize that maybe a committee member doesn't work, it's not life or death to switch them out. You know, even if that might mean more paperwork, even if that might mean a slight setback, but realizing that the people that is on your committee should be your biggest cheerleaders and supporters, there should not be the biggest barriers that you have to get through. Anything to add to that, Jay? And there's another question that came in.
I kind of second all of that. I guess probably it's going to vary a lot by what it is that we're doing. I know that if you're kind of choosing a topic and a method and an analytic technique and all of that, you may want to kind of judge your progress by how other people are doing in the program. And I think that's a bad idea. I think that there's just some processes that take a little bit longer, have more risk associated with them, and may just require a few extra sacrifices that would not be required if you were working, you know, in a very narrow domain, using a tried and true method, not taking on any special challenges. So I don't kind of judge the approaches that others have taken, but don't judge your progress by what the other people around you are doing. I kind of approach my degree more like a buffet. So I'm trying to sample a little bit from everything. And along the way, as I'm doing something, I'm trying not to repeat myself and just kind of stay in one place, but I'm really trying to approach it more like an exploratory study, approaching my education like a qualitative research program, just kind of sampling, trying things out, being a part of this community, moving over here, mixing these three things. And very early on, if you just kind of approach it like a buffet or a qualitative research program, your education will be very stimulating and you'll get great feedback from your advisor and committee members because you'll genuinely discover new connections. You know, probably like keep them on their toes more than anything. So yeah, follow your curiosity. Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. And I will say that a lot of funders and granting agencies are looking for people who are very collaborative and interdisciplinary as well. So it is a plus, not a negative. And I categorize my first 2 years as being strategic exploration, you know, and because at that point where you get to your candidacy stage, that you have to start narrowing down and being able to have what it is that you're interested in. And somebody asked a question about like at the point when you were applying to the PhD program, it seems like all of you had spent a couple of years working full time. Were there any issues with not having published recently or beforehand or not having strong connections to academia? And so I will echo what Allison put in the chat box, that it's helpful to start developing relationships where you can, but want programs that can be super supportive if you don't have previous publications. And so fortunately for me, I was in a tenure track position, so that required presentations, publications, etc. And so I did have not a lot, a few publications, but more within librarianship side. And so I did have one or two, but the whole point of pursuing a PhD is to develop your research skills and your publishing skills and etc. So if they're expecting you to have like, I don't know, 15 peer-reviewed empirical studies before you start, that's probably not the right program for you. And the thing is that PhD programs should be looking for not just how much you publish or where you publish, but also where you can fill the gaps that exist with your research. Anything else anyone would like to add? These are great questions. Keep them coming.
Yeah, I think like I would just jump in and like echo what you said and what I said. Like I think there is this perception that some programs are very insistent on having previous publications. I do think that can be true, but I think part of that is just finding a way to sell yourself, to show that you have the potential to do self-directed work, you have deep research interests, Those kinds of things can be just as important as like previously writing. I had done like teeny bit, right? Like I did an undergraduate thesis. I've had a couple of masters, all the things, but like not peer reviewed publications. But I do also think like a lot of the time the relationships can make or break, because PhD admissions, I don't think we said this clearly, are not like other level of admissions. Undergrad and even most master's programs, there's like a pile of applications. There's somebody whose job it is to go through them, see if you meet the metrics, et cetera, et cetera. You got the grades, you got the score, whatever. Even most master's programs, right? I've been in academia for a long time in different kinds of jobs. PhD programs are the faculty are looking at the applications and saying, yes, this one, no, not that one, right? Like the people who you're going to be working with and teaching you are the ones who are looking at it. So where you can develop those relationships ahead of time in a meaningful way, where you, if that's not possible, right? Sometimes you can't contact the people, but make sure if you say, I want to work with this person, make sure it makes sense that you want to work with that person, not just that they're like prestigious or exciting or really nice. Like that's cool, but like why would you be an asset to their research agenda? Because it is truly the faculty are pulling people's names out of the pile and choosing who to work with in a way that doesn't happen at any other stage of like academic applications. And I feel like that's kind of a hidden curriculum thing that most people don't know. So find ways to make those connections. And perhaps if you can have somebody who goes, I already know them, I want them here, that can make all the difference.
And I would just say, because I'm cognizant that some people may have access to chat box, some people may not, and for the recording, some folks may not. The thing is that, as Allison said, is correct, because you have faculty, all of the faculty, at least at UMD, they read the applications, and you have to at least have at least one or two people who said, I pick you. It's kind of like Pokemon a little bit, but but then basically you have somebody who says that, I'm willing to be this person's provisional advisor, and the reason why I say find 2 to 3 people at each program who could be your advisor is because I've known people who are on the third advisor, and it's because maybe an advisor left the institution, and if somebody's advisor unfortunately died, and so like they ended up with someone. I mean, there's some circumstances that you cannot even prepare for, but also taking into advice, you just don't want to go to an institution because of one person. Because you don't if that person's on their way out, meaning that they might be leaving for another job, or they may not have the capacity to take on a PhD student that year or in a few years as well. And so those are some of the things that if you're not in a PhD program and you're looking to go into, definitely think about that and talk to the advisee. The advisee will tell you a lot of things. They will tell you a lot of things. So just wanted to add on to that. And I'll just put in a call. Is there any more questions, just in case there's someone feverishly typing away? Okay. Do you have any tips for handling the interview part of the PhD application process? There was not one for UMD. No. So I think Syracuse had and I remember talking to someone. So I can speak to this since I had to talk to people about myself and to project what's not. And so one of the things you want to do is, if you know anyone who was in that PhD program, that you're interested in, to talk to them about, like, are there typical questions that they ask? I treat it like it's a job interview, because they usually want to know, like, why you're interested in this institution, what can you contribute to this program, what you hope to get out of this program, what is your research agenda, are there any faculty you're interested in working with, but also not just the program, but if there's other faculty outside in the institution, the wider community that you want to work with. And it's your time to shine, because you've gotten to this point. They want you. You just have to be like, this is who I am over the phone or Zoom or in person. And so it's very nerve-wracking, but they're wishing They want you, and they're rooting for you to be successful and to win. And so if you've ever been in a job interview before, just treat it as such. It's very similar in a lot of different ways. So make sure you have like a list of things that you're ready to talk about, to make sure you leave them with, to be like, I am the person that should be admitted because of these X reasons, and you can work them into the questions they ask and et cetera. But also, you're also interviewing them too, because you're dedicating so much time, so much time, energy, money, if you're moving across country, to that program. And so you also want to make sure it is the right program for you too.
Yeah, I would just like to echo, like, it, even if you aren't doing an interview, right? Like, you interview them as much as they're interviewing you. Twanna touched on this, like, know where you're going, know what the community's like. You're going to be living there from anywhere from 4 to 8 years, depending on the style of program. Be really clear about that and think about the culture of the program, right? Like, one of the other programs I looked at, but didn't apply for, whatever, because of pandemic shutdown, but was going to apply for, right? I knew and I had learned that they were like really rigid and hierarchical. Like, you would call the professor's doctor, and like, which is fine if that's your vibe. That's not my vibe, right? Like, those little things can be an indicator that, like, oh, you aren't really treated like a peer until you graduate, which to me, like, as a PhD student candidate is kind of wild, right? But like, think through where your priorities are and how you want to be treated for the next 4 to 8 years. And really take that seriously, because your life is happening now. It doesn't happen when you're done the PhD. So find ways to not be miserable while you're in it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So with that, we're gonna wrap up. Is there any last minute things, Allison, Jay, that you want to share as we close out?
Allison?
I am happy to be reached. I'm really easy to find. I have university email addresses all over the place. So you find me, reach out, just tell me where you saw me. I'm happy to chat with anyone who like has, unique questions that I can help with.
Yeah, you can always contact me as well. I don't think I reached out to anyone in the lab before I joined this lab, but I suppose I could have done that. I mean, I know of someone who met their advisor years ago at a conference, and that individual was just graduated from their PhD and was getting the professorship, and the kind of young student was engaged with this soon-to-be professor. So that's how she found her inroads to graduate school, and today is very successful. So there's a lot of preparation that occurs even before you begin to interview or visit the campus for an orientation. Like I said, I've just spent a summer going around the country and visiting different campuses. So I already had inroads with my advisor. Reach out to every student on LinkedIn, direct message them, look at their emails, just email them, ask for an inside perspective, get a handle on the different syllabi if you like. You can preview the courses.
Mhm.
Get a sense of if there are any funding issues, or whether you like the environment, whether that environment is going to work for you, the cities nearby, commutes. You just kind of have to factor everything in. There's a lot of research that you have to do for sure to make a great decision and be comfortable with it. But yeah, now that you've kind of the web and different social media platforms, it's not impossible. You just have to begin that process very early.
My last words would be, this is a major decision. But if you decide at any point it's not right for you, it is okay. It is okay. Deciding to pursue a PhD is a major decision, as well as every semester and every stage you make it through the program. And I've known people who wasn't until their second or third try that they've got their EDD or their PhD, and so it is great that you all are here. For those who are in the PhD program, those who are interested in pursuing one, to hear from different people's experiences, because no one experience is going to be the same as yours. However, do not suffer in silence, and you are not alone. You know, the program is meant to help build you, not to break you. Okay. I'll say that again. The program is meant to help build you, not to break you, not to traumatize you, and not that. Okay. And so with that, thank you all for sticking with us for the live participants. For those who are watching the recording, any of us are open to being contacted. Feel free to reach out, especially if you have like more unique or personal questions you want to ask. And good luck in your journey, whether you are starting a PhD program, continuing, or looking into one. So thank you all so much. I hope you all have a wonderful Thursday night and weekend.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you all.